think we can start. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon, morning or evening. My name is Ettore Greco. I am the Executive Vice President of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, International Affairs Institute of Rome. And I have the great pleasure to open this outreach meeting entitled The EU Role in Non-Proliferation and Disarmament and its engagement with academia and the younger generation. Let me thank all of you for accepting our invitation. And of course, a special thanks to our distinguished panelists. The meeting has been jointly organized by my institute at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Our two institutes, the International Affairs Institute and the Vienna Center, are both members of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium, funded by the European Union. The consortium, which was established by a decision of the EU Council in 2010, it's now in its third cycle of activities, includes other 4 European study centers, and is chaired by the study center SIPRI of Stockholm. I wish to underline that the consortiums promotes the research activities of a much wider network that has been expanding over time and now includes some 100 European study centers working on non-proliferation and disarmament issues. The central mission of the consortium is to promote the security discussion about the EU's non-proliferation and disarmament strategy through a variety of activities, including the publication of research and policy papers, conferences, seminars, and outreach events like today's event. These events are targeted to different audiences and involving scholars, think tankers, practitioners, and decision makers, but also through educational activities and training programs and ad hoc communication instruments, including a dedicated website and a monthly newsletter. An important point to stress is that the consortium also makes a steady effort to enlarge the strategic debate on EU's policies and initiatives on non-proliferation and disarmament to students, experts, and practitioners from non-EU countries, with the goal of promoting an exchange of different national and regional views and perspectives on the most urgent non-proliferation and disarmament challenges. It is in the context of the consortium of this large program that we have been developing in the last couple of years a specific next generation dimension, which aims to involve young students and scholars in our discussion about the future of multilateral cooperation in arms control. But also, and this is a second, not less important purpose, also give them the opportunity to familiarize with or specialize on arms control, and if they wish, pursue a career in the field. To that end, our program foresees various events with a large participation of young students and experts. Our feeling is that those meetings are contributing to advancing our strategic discussion and serve the additional purpose of consolidating a next generation network that we are committed to promote and with which we want to stay in constant contact. Let me also mention that we have started in that context a mentorship program for young women. A couple of weeks ago, we held the first meeting of this new program targeted to young women. I think most of the mentees that we have selected through an open competition are participating in today's meeting. Let me also stress that the EU institutions, the European External Action Service and the European Commission, have ardently supported these fresh activities of our consortium that involve the young generation. And so I would like to thank them for their support and encouragement. This second outreach event is specifically devoted to the European Union and its non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control policies. We want to discuss the role that the EU plays in the current rapidly evolving security and arms control environment, what the Union has achieved, its shortcomings that need to be addressed, and the challenges ahead. The second and closely linked goal of the meeting is to have an exchange of views on what it means to work in this field, the skills that are required, the concrete opportunities that are offered to women and young people, and also possibly the most effective ways to pursue a career in arms control. We will do that with the help of three prominent experts, and I would say European figures, who will talk about their direct experiences and lessons learned during their careers. I'm sure the insights and information that they will provide will be stimulating and thought-provoking for all of us. Let me then briefly present our three speakers: Federica Mogherini, Rector of the College of Europe, former High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission; Marjolijn van Deelen, Special Envoy for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation of the European Union External Action Service of the European Union; and Sibylle Bauer, Chair of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium, and also Director of Studies, Armament and Disarmament of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, of Stockholm, which, as I stress, is coordinating the work of our consortium Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. Following their remarks, the panel will be open to your questions and comments. And of course, I strongly encourage all of you to take the floor. As I said, our main partner in organizing this meeting and the whole program that I have briefly described is the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. This cooperation has been extremely fruitful and rewarding, and we are indeed most grateful to our colleagues of the Vienna Center. And I have now the great pleasure to give the floor to Elena Sokova, Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, who will be chairing the panel. Elena, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ettore, for your kind introduction and for your partnership in many of the activities that you described, including today's event. It is my greatest pleasure and honor to moderate today's discussion. Not every day we have an opportunity to bring such a stellar women speakers to talk about non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament, and hear from them about the role of Europe, and in particular the European Union in the field, but also discuss how the field has changed over the years, share their own experience and career, and other thoughts that they have on how to engage more women and young people in this work. Since Ettore has already introduced our outstanding panelists, what I would suggest we do is the following, and that's how we envision today's event. I'll first give the floor to our panelists for them to share some of their initial remarks. Then which will be followed up by the second round of questions, and then the floor will open to all of you. In the meantime, you are welcome to send your questions through Q&A function, or send them to the events at vcdnp.org. But before I give the floor to Federica Mogherini, I wanted to maybe preface with some of the suggestions that we gave each of our speakers to cover today. And we wanted to hear from Federica about the role that the EU played in the adoption of the joint comprehensive plan of action, which is something that is on the mind of many of us who work in this field and in the news, particularly in the news here in Vienna, where the negotiations are continuing to revive the deal and put it back together. Also, what are the greatest challenges and how they were overcome in the negotiations? Can this agreement be saved? And if not, what kind of implications will this have on international security? So, Federica, we're so pleased to have you with us today. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for this initiative that I believe is really important, especially as it's an outreach to the younger generation, and in particular, encouraging women's role in this fascinating field of action. And I think this is really crucial at this time. And thank you for inviting me together with such a good company. I'll try to share some of my experiences in this field. Obviously, I think the focus for me, the natural focus for me would be obviously the nuclear deal with Iran that we negotiated for a long time. The EU negotiated and facilitated for a long time. I jumped in only in the very last months, but crucial months of the negotiations, and then we managed to achieve an agreement on the 14th of July 2015, as you mentioned, and now again talks in Vienna, mediated and facilitated by the European Union. And in particular, the High Representative and his representative is trying to revive the full implementation of the agreement. And I believe that indeed the European Union, and in particular the role of the External Action Service and the High Representative has always been key in guaranteeing that even after the US withdrawal, the agreement was kept alive. I would put it this way. I often say it is still alive, even if not in good health. Which makes it possible now to go through reanimation somehow. But it was essential from what I've seen. Indeed, has been crucial and tough work. It has been key, the role of the European Union team in achieving the agreement, in preparing the ground for the agreement, of the High Representative in what is a unique setup from an institutional point of view. I like to remind that because I think this invites us to be creative whenever we need to address a specific problem that has different facets and different implications and ramifications. I'm sure the negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal were the only one that had that particular institutional setup, starting from the mandate of the UN Security Council resolution, if I don't remember wrong, 2003, very long ago, indicating then in a UN Security Council resolution the scope of the mandate and the negotiations, but also the facilitator in the person of the High Representative of the Union. Something unique. A EU official mandated by the UN Security Council to run a multilateral negotiation on a nuclear non-proliferation issue. And then this role of the High Representative personally, supported by the External Action Service, is kept in the monitoring of the implementation of the agreement still today. And I think this is a creative and very useful connection that can strengthen the multilateral approach to non-proliferation negotiations and agreements, because it anchors somehow the wider UN framework to a more operational and I would say institutionalized way of conducting the facilitation of the negotiations in the EU institution. What I have seen in those months, and I'm sure with questions we can go back to that, was a lot of technical work done by what I have found a remarkable team of experts, mainly from the European Union, on two main issues: the sanctions-related issues. They were obviously an instrumental part to create an incentive for Iran to sign up to the agreement, and also on the nuclear commitments as such. And I was, I have to say, I just arrived in Brussels a few months before, and I was really surprised and impressed by the quality of the experts, the technical expertise that was there, and the level of dedication and commitment that was there. Not many people know that the text of the JCPOA, 100 and more pages, indeed plenty of details and technicalities that were essential to make it sure that for us, for all of us, that nothing was left to interpretation afterwards, and that everybody was fully aware of what they were signing up to. The text is largely, I wouldn't say exclusively, because also other teams of the negotiating parties obviously contributed to that. But as the European Union was not a party to the negotiations, but the facilitator of the negotiations, it was somehow the pen holder of the text. And I would say I was very proud, and I would never stop being grateful for that. I was very proud of the quality of the technical team that was supporting that work, both on nuclear-related issues and on sanctions issues. And again, I think this was an excellent example of synergy on multilateralism applied to non-proliferation between the UN system and the European Union, including afterwards cooperation with the IEA in Vienna, obviously, and even during the final stages of negotiations, where indeed exchanges with the IEA were on a more than daily basis conducted. And then the role of the European Union, I think, has been key and crucial in keeping and preserving the agreement alive after the US left. And this is exactly because of the mandate that the UN Security Council gave to the European Union. It gave us the power and the responsibility somehow also to resist to the pressures that were coming from Washington and that were asking somehow Europeans to abandon the agreement together with them. But we had a different role to play, and we had the role of preserving and guaranteeing that the agreement was monitored and implemented. And this gave us a very solid political reason and also institutional basis for doing so, including in reaching out to Russia and China and obviously Iran. And I think this was really quite an extraordinary exercise. I'm sure we'll go back to the Iran nuclear deal in the Q&A part. I have to say I'm following with a lot of interest talks that are going on in Vienna, and still in contact with some old friends. And I have to say, I know that many are skeptical about the possible outcome, positive outcome of this renewed talks, but I'm not that negative about that. I think that there is a chance for the JCPOA to go back to full compliance from all parties, which means the US to rejoin and Iran to go back to full compliance on nuclear commitments. But again, happy to elaborate more on that in the Q&A session. Just let me say one final word, because I've already been long enough. And that is that even if the nuclear deal with Iran is definitely my main area of competence in this field, I have to admit, and Ettore might remember that already when I was in the Italian Parliament in the Defense Committee, in the Chamber of Deputies and in the Foreign Affairs Committee, I was extremely interested and active at different levels, obviously, on disarmament and non-proliferation issues through different networks and at different levels. And I've always been convinced that Europeans have a particular role to play in promoting non-proliferation and disarmament because of our history, because we have experienced the damage that the lack of non-proliferation and arms control can bring to our own communities and societies. Europe has been the continent that has produced more war in the history of human beings. And I think that this gives us a responsibility and a certain wisdom that we have the possibility, I think, to try and exercise at best. And I think that in particular, Europe has a role to play when it comes to the NPT. I very well remember one of my first choices when I was becoming High Representative. If I'm not wrong, it was spring 2015. I insisted to deliver the speech on behalf of the European Union at the NPT Review Conference in New York on the general debate, something that normally was not done at the level of the High Representative, but for me was a statement of the importance that I believed and still believe needs to be attached to this kind of processes, as well as it was always a point of a non-negotiable point for me to participate always in the events, and including in New York in the General Assembly of the CTBTO. I think that is also an essential organization we need to support, and I very well remember that in my 5 years in office. We've done a lot, and Marjolijn might elaborate more on that. I think the trend is continuing to give support and consistent support to the CTBTO, and I think that this is really the key example of how also the larger public opinion can understand how relevant this work is also for our daily life, also in a non necessarily arm-related context. And I think I just mentioned these two elements, but obviously there can be many others. I really believe that there is a lot that the Europeans can do. I think a lot is being done, but probably a little bit more can also be done. Always possible to increase the level of investment and political investment included, and attention. But I think that really we can should be somehow the champions of the solidity and the predictability and the reliability of the non-proliferation and disarmament architecture on a multilateral level. So again, sorry if I was too long. Looking forward to hearing your inputs and then exchanging with the larger audience. Thank you again.
Thank you, Federica. Thank you. And kind of a good segue to our next speaker, because you spoke about the multilateral institutions and multilateral diplomacy, which is one of the kind of key tenets also of the European Union and European countries. Many of them is one of the key supporters of multilateralism. And turning to Marjolijn, what role does the EU play in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament? Continue that discussion with particular focus on multilateral efforts and political and diplomatic achievements in that field. And also maybe elaborate a little bit how this role has changed over the years and where we're heading. Marjolijn.
All right, well, thank you very much, Elena, and thanks to VCDNP and IAI for organizing. And good afternoon to all. It's great that so many people have signed up for this webinar and are present. The work on the JCPOA that Federica spoke about is one of the really great examples of where the EU has played and is still playing a leading role in important negotiations on a really big issue. And I will speak more in general about the role of the EU in non-proliferation and disarmament, where clearly, as you alluded to, Elena, our strength is in our multilateral approach to security, because we cannot tackle global challenges alone. And the EU is very committed to preserving and strengthening the rule-based multilateral international order with the UN at its core. So those are very nice phrases, and we use them a lot. But what does it look like? Well, it is about supporting the arms control architecture and its treaties. It's about supporting the multilateral institutions. It is about supporting third countries in the implementation. and it's about further developing the NPD architecture. So I'm going to speak about the role of the EU in each of these areas, and I'll give you many examples, but in no way I can be exhaustive here. But first, what is the EU in this context? I represent here the EU's External Action Service, the EEAS, it's already mentioned. It's our diplomatic service, if you will. But the EU has many other institutions that contribute to non-proliferation and disarmament. And some of them, I think, were also included in Federica's remarks about the wonderful technical support that she had. For example, the European Commission manages the EU's CBRN risk mitigation centers of excellence, which are regional centers that provide training and assistance on non-proliferation implementation to third countries. The European Commission also manages the EU's policies on dual-use export controls, it's a very important instrument of non-proliferation. Another one is the Joint Research Center, the JRC, that has, for example, shared expertise on technical issues relating to disarmament verification, to IPNDV. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Euratom, who implement nuclear safeguards in the EU, but they also provide valuable expertise on international safeguards development to the IAEA and to my office. And these are just a few examples to give you an idea. And altogether, the EU institutions cooperate in the implementation of an overarching EU strategy against the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction. And what's more, we do this in close cooperation with our 27 member states. So when I speak of the EU, there is much more to it than meets the eye. And I saw that we have a wide range of participants in this webinar, and I'm sure that all are familiar with different EU institutions depending on where they're from and where they work. But back to the role of the EU. First, the international arms control architecture. The EU has been very active in taking a principled position in support of existing treaties and agreements. Internally, with the member states, we coordinate our positions and make statements, taking a very constructive approach in support of these treaties, and the ones on the NPT review conference and in the CTBT Article 14 conferences are very good examples of those. But at many levels, we express our views, our coordinated views. We also do a lot of outreach, or sometimes we use the diplomatically heavier instrument of démarches to call on others to do likewise, or to accede to treaties that they have not yet acceded to. And with a number of countries, we also have regular dedicated dialogues. And we also speak up when it's needed, as we did, for instance, very clearly on the need for the extension of New START. And the most important upcoming event, of course, is the NPT review conference, into which a big effort will go. We're doing démarches, we have prepared working papers and working on more. We prepare an EU position which will be agreed at the ministerial level. We support the president-designate, etc. So this outreach to third countries really means promoting multilateralism. Another example, the day before yesterday, I participated in an outreach event on the H Code of Conduct in Latin America. And the EU has asked FRS, the Fondation de la Recherche Stratégique, to help us promote the code and achieve universalization. And to this end, they have written briefs and reports and organized outreach webinars in which the HCOC chair typically also participates. And in this way, we hope to increase the understanding about the HCOC, facilitate discussions about its advantages and disadvantages, and increase support for it. And this is also a good example of an area where we have asked academia to work closely with us. But of course, the greatest achievement in the cooperation with academia is the creation of the EU Consortium on Non-Proliferation and Disarmament and its network of NGOs. But Sibylle Bauer will speak to that afterwards. So moving on to supporting institutions. Many of the Existing non-proliferation disarmament treaties are supported by organizations or secretariats. Of course, in Vienna, there's the IAEA and the CTBTO, both of which receive millions of EU funding to support their work. But they can also count on active political and diplomatic support of the EU and its member states. And the same holds true for the OPCW in The Hague, the Implementation Support Unit of the BTWC, UNODA in New York, etc. The third point, very important, is supporting the implementation of international agreements. And of course, all states have their own obligations to implement the agreement, the commitments that they agree to, but we can help. One example is a new initiative that was launched just last month for capacity building on implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty to make arms trade more responsible. And this initiative is carried out through the ATT Secretariat. In addition, what I mentioned before about the EU Centers of Excellence is also very relevant here. They work with 62 partner countries on CBRN prevention and preparedness. And I'd also like to mention the capacity building in relation to Resolution 5040, which we implement through UNODA and the OSCE, or the EU P2P export control program. I could carry on, but I won't. I'll stop here. And more seriously, when we speak about implementation, compliance and accountability are crucial. The NPT, the treaty, has allowed us to address Iran's nuclear program. It provided the framework. The Chemical Weapons Convention allows us to address Syria's chemical weapon use. And we truly believe that this kind of effort shouldn't be necessary. But when it is necessary and there is non-compliance or there's serious doubts about non-compliance, then these need to be addressed properly. Because it's a problem that needs resolving, and because the treaties need to remain credible. And the EU fundamentally believes in the power of multilateral diplomacy to resolve issues peacefully. Now, my fourth point is about developing the NPT architecture, so to work towards the future. To keep the architecture fit for purpose, it needs continuous maintenance and work. And we need to find solutions to new issues, how to deal with the strong growth of ballistic missiles, how to deal with emerging and disruptive technologies in arms control. How do we position the EU in discussions on strategic stability, especially in new domains such as outer space? Here we have no easy answers, but EU internal discussions to find common ground are very helpful to gain a shared understanding. And also here we work closely with academia to feed us with ideas and suggestions that we can think of and translate to policy options. But it can also be much more practical than that. Since VCDNP is in Vienna, safeguards development must be close to your heart. The IAEA has worked, or the EU has worked with the IAEA and others to set up the first ever academic master program on nuclear safeguards for the coming academic year. And for this, a special recruitment campaign for students outside of Europe is ongoing. The EU has also gained experience on remote technical training for safeguards inspectors that was shared with the IAEA. And we maintain a state-of-the-art nuclear forensics capabilities at the JRC site in Karlsruhe, etc. Again, these are examples to illustrate what is behind the words when we say the EU actively supports. And when we say that, it really means something. And it can be very technical, or it can be at the political or diplomatic level. So I hope I have briefly sketched the framework in which the EU works on non-proliferation and disarmament, grounded in multilateralism and in working with our partners. But to do that, we need academia. We diplomats do not have all the answers. By far, we don't. Therefore, I'm really happy that Sibylle will speak about the EU Consortium. And I'm also really, really pleased that you have embarked on this engagement with young women and the next generation. As you know, the EU is a strong supporter of women, peace and security agenda. And young people are important, women are important, so young women are doubly important. So I'm really happy with this initiative. I'd like to leave it at this for now, and looking forward to the questions and to elaborate more. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you, Marjolijn, and thank you for being so supportive of engaging the academia and the non-governmental experts. And that gives perfect, again, headway to give the floor to Sibylle to talk about the EU consortium and maybe also the work of the academia as well, since and think tanks that she represents one as well. Sibylle, why don't you take it away?
Yes, thank you very much, Elena, and hello to everybody who's joining us in cyberspace. We're actually celebrating the 10th anniversary of the consortium and the network as we speak, so this is actually really a good moment also to take stock and look back. And let me start by elaborating a bit on the consortium and the network. Ettore already touched upon that. So the consortium consists of 6 think tanks who organize all the activities. And that sometimes gets confused with the network, which is much larger. So in the consortium, we have the 2 organizations that organize this webinar. We have the colleagues in Rome and the colleagues in Vienna and SIPRI, but we also have FRS in Paris. We also have IISS in London, and we have PRIF, which is the Peace Research Institute, Frankfurt. So the network is actually formally called, according to the council decision, the European Network of Independent Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Think Tanks. And the word independent is actually quite important. It was established with the support of all EU member states, and the EU therefore plays a very important role in funding independent research on non-proliferation and disarmament and education on non-proliferation and disarmament. In the network, we now have over 100 research centers, including many university departments. We have network members from all EU member states and also 6 European countries that are not in the EU, and that currently include Switzerland, Norway, the UK, Ukraine, Turkey, and Serbia, and more to come in the future. We have a mix of academic institutions and policy think tanks. We have a mix of social and natural sciences. And just 3 years ago, we were at around 60 network members, with many member states missing, especially the smaller ones, with less academic participation, less natural science participation. So I think that this expansion is really a major achievement. Now let me move on to activities, and most of them have actually been implemented from the start, so already for about a decade. We have the big, what can be called the flagship event, the annual international conference. And then we also have events that bring together European officials and experts from the network. First of all, for the annual consultative meeting, and then we also have ad hoc thematic seminars. The next ones coming up will be on the Biological Weapons Convention and on outer space. Then we have a policy paper series. We are now at number 74. All the papers are available publicly on our website, and the latest paper was just published this week. It's on outer space, and I very much recommend it for reading. We have a set of e-learning modules, and those have become ever more popular during the pandemic because of the increase in remote teaching and remote learning. And I should also emphasize that they're actually used internationally, so not just by Europeans, but in all continents. We also have an internship programs, and these interns can be hosted at any of the over 100 network members. And it's also very important, and not everybody knows that the internships are not limited to Europeans. So if there's anybody interested out there in cyberspace, do feel free and apply. And because they are mostly, because of the pandemic now taking place remotely, that also creates new opportunities to participate. Even though I know that we all hope we can go back to in-person meetings and in-person internships soon. Then we have a number of new activities that only started 3 years ago, and that includes the visit to Brussels of the UN Disarmament Fellows. And it also includes the Proliferation Awareness course for the Natural Sciences, which is still in the pilot phase. And that actually brings me to recent initiatives and also the way forward. Elena, when VCDNP issued the call for applications for the last course on proliferation awareness for IT and engineering students, I know that very few applications that you received were from women, and that as a result of that, you decided to make a dedicated effort to reach out to the natural science faculties and to women. And we also observed that there are gender imbalances in the field more broadly, and I'm sure we'll speak a bit about that a bit later on in the seminar. And just to give 2 concrete examples, when we invited the network members to send 1 representative to Brussels, the majority sent men, and the same was actually the case for the EU member states. So what we've done is at least to ensure that there is gender balance among the authors of the papers, of the speakers, but we all know that there's still some way to go to ensure gender balance also among participants and among those who ask questions. And I should also point out, to give a different set of statistics, that this is actually not because there's a lack of interest of young people and young women in non-proliferation and disarmament issues. When our colleagues in Rome issued the open calls for the next generation seminars, it was actually the majority of the applications that came from women. So in 2019, 70%, and in 2020, 60%. And again, as I said, from all over the world. So we decided to start a mentoring initiative, which is focusing in particular on young women, and also to expand our next generation initiative beyond a one-off event to something that is ongoing and sustained throughout the year. And this webinar is one part of that. And I would like to really express a big thanks to my colleagues in Rome and Vienna, who have been very much the drivers behind these efforts. We are also exploring other ways to strengthen non-proliferation, disarmament, arms control education. And we are very fortunate that in the network, we have many university-affiliated members who are actively supporting these efforts. We are also trying to make more teaching resources available to complement the e-learning modules that we have. We will also transform the website into an interactive space to facilitate an exchange among the network members. And we want to very much further expand the network, not just in terms of disciplines, but also geographically. So as I mentioned, there are more countries that I would love to join from Eastern Europe and also from Southeast Europe. So last but not least, on the way forward, we also want to further strengthen the engagement with researchers and research centers globally. And we are very much open to suggestions as to make this happen. So do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any ideas and suggestions. So it has become quite obvious, I think, that the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Network is quite unique in many ways. Unfortunately, it has no equivalent in other regions yet. That may still happen in the future. And special is not just that it brings together different disciplines, but also that it connects different expert communities because it covers such a wide range of issues. So it's not just about nuclear, as some people think. It's also about chemical weapons, biological weapons, about missiles, about conventional arms, including small arms like weapons, about outer space, and about emerging tech. So to conclude, I'm really glad that the EU Council has just decided to extend our activities for another year. This was a no-cost extension as a result of the pandemic. And I very much hope that the EU support for independent research and the EU's very active engagement with the research community will continue for many years to come. And at many events that we all regularly attend, the speakers call for new ideas for creative solutions. And I think this is exactly why we need this engagement between the policy community and the research community. So with that, thanks very much. Back to you, Elena.
Thank you, Sibylle. And we also need to the engagement of the next generation. But you mentioned that in many cases, the delegations sent as men or their panels where all the men, so to speak. I think today we're compensating for that, given the composition of our today's panel. But the issue is still there in terms of the gender parity, even though I would think Europe is doing, Europe is doing much better than many other regions. Nonetheless, just a very recent incident involving Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, the so-called Sofagate, reminds that things need to be really kept, and the discussions need to be ongoing, and things need to be done more in this area. And it's even in Europe. But what I thought that we would have a short round of exchanges before I open the floor to the questions is really to speak about your experience of being a woman working in this field, in arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament. Maybe also share what kind of skills you think are the most needed to work in this area and build your career and expertise. And also your thoughts how we can better engage more women and young people in the work that we do. Why don't we just go in the same order, if you don't mind? Federica, why don't we start with you?
Yes, I'm afraid I have many stories about being the only woman around the table. And sometimes this is in itself quite a powerful message because it makes, most of all because it makes the women that are sitting in the second row, because normally you have very few women sitting around the negotiating table, but then you have normally quite a good number of women sitting in the back row as a support team, as experts, as note takers sometimes. Part of the delegation is always there. And I think it's always good for the many, especially many young women sitting in the second row of the delegations or the negotiating tables, to see that there are at least few or one woman around the main table, because it can open the way for the sky's the limit. You can get there. I have also to say that personally, I've faced some situations where actually it was the contrary. Sometimes the European Union delegation was only composed by women. And that was a very strong embarrassment element for our interlocutors. That happened in particular on some fights. Well, on the Iran negotiations, it was myself and Helga Schmidt sitting at the table, so 2 women out of 2. And quite a good number of women also in the rest of the delegation. Actually, the majority of the EU delegation present in Vienna for the final round of talks were women. And there were some women also on the Iranian delegation. There was a very strong spokeswoman. The spokesperson of the Iranian delegation during those crucial talks was a woman. And I can tell you, dealing with the Iranian journalists outside of the building was not the easiest task. And yet she was extremely effective. So, but I also faced them beyond the non-proliferation and disarmament field, where indeed I think there is, in particular, a strong presence of men in comparison to women as a field of expertise, which I'm afraid will have to be addressed also starting from academia and the curricula. We encourage our girl students to follow. But apart from that, in many other negotiations or diplomatic visits or meetings, it happened to me quite a lot of times to have an all-women delegation on our side of the table and an all-men delegation on the other side. And this was always, I would say, a smiley, nice way to open the conversation, saying that maybe there is a gender balance work to be done on both sides, but obviously your interlocutors know that what you mean. For instance, the Balkan team was fully women composed in the External Action Service when I was there, and the Balkans is not always a place where you find a lot of women on the other side of the table. But I think that there is capacity, the possibility to lead by example here. I think it's the strongest message we can send. And this requires coherence and consistency also from member states, indeed, to be represented by women also, and not only by men, including on non-proliferation and disarmament issues. On the skill, and by the way, one of the, I would say, two of the strongest US interlocutors I've ever had, and most interesting and competent, were both dealing with non-proliferation and disarmament issues. One is back in the State Department today, Wendy Sherman. And if you look really at the JCPOA, for me, the photo of the moment when we got the deal done was herself, Helga Schmidt, and myself in a moment where we were having coffee and looking at the last points. And strangely enough, we are laughing, and that photo captures that moment of negotiation where you're so beyond tiredness that you manage to laugh even in the middle of the night and in the middle of the finalization of details. But one is Wendy Sherman, and the other one is Rose Gottemeller, that has been working on non-proliferation and disarmament for, I would say, all her life with great results, and is now back in academia. And I think both are great role models for the girls that are probably following us, and the young women that are following us, and aspire to enter this field. And Rose, having been, I wouldn't say at the end of her career because it's not ended yet, but having been the first woman ever Deputy Secretary General of NATO. So you can do arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament, and then become the NATO Deputy Secretary General, which is also quite something on top of being a woman. In terms of its skills and you know, things that have helped, or in the personally for me, it has not been anything different than other forms of negotiations and diplomatic exercises. And I would say in one word, two words, in my personal experience, the two basic skills you have to try and facilitate a negotiation, including non-proliferation and disarmament ones, are one, the capacity to establish some empathy with the different parties around the table, to create a connection, to connect with the human beings beyond the briefing papers they have in front of them. And because this creates the basis for trust and for sharing also feelings and emotions that sometimes in difficult negotiations come up. And the second element is the capacity that I think women have. The empathy element is usually associated indeed with a woman capacity, even if it's not always the case, but often. And the other elements that I've always found essential to facilitate negotiations or mediations is the capacity to identify rationally what your interlocutor or what the parties to the negotiation need to get out of an agreement. Normally, you focus on the red lines, what they cannot have in the agreements, but not always you focus on what they absolutely need to have in the agreement. So focusing on the positive and trying to act, not excluding the respective red lines, but rather to add the essential elements that need to be put in, because this makes for all the different parties more acceptable, also to accept something that they might consider as a red line for them, but they have their fundamental part in it. And this might be worth it and enough to sell it back home. On the Iran deal, somehow it worked like this, I believe. Personally, I used the same method when I was chairing the council to get unanimity, still at 28 with the UK after the Brexit referendum. My method was never to shorten the text, was to make it longer. Maybe it's an Italian attitude, but to add all the elements that were essential for all parties to the negotiation to see on paper, so that they could go home and say, but you know, our part is in, we won. We got this point that for us is essential. And that made it a little bit easier to swallow the parts that were a little bit less their own target.
Thank you, Federica, for sharing this insights about the skills. And yeah, it's both for you and for Marjolijn, is like 28 countries to always get agreement on and engage them. It is not an easy task. But I'm also really grateful for you to kind of sharing and some of the examples of other women in the field. You yourself were a foreign minister of Italy very early, before you assumed your EU role. But I agree, there are many of the very fine role models, and that is something that the next generation and young women should really look up to. Marjolijn, I didn't know that you actually have a degree in geophysics. Yeah, it was a surprise to me, but maybe you could share your story. I was like, wow, from geophysics to diplomacy.
Yeah, well, my guidance in life is that you should do what fascinates you and what you like and what is cool. And I studied geophysics because I thought everything tectonophysics and volcanoes is extremely cool. But then at the time when I graduated, there were not many jobs to be had. And then I thought, well, why not try the foreign ministry? Because they get to go cool places all over the world and do a lot of interesting things. And to my surprise, I was accepted. I did have some other background as well that helped. But also because my foreign ministry also had the vision that to have a good body of diplomats, you don't only need lawyers or historians or people that studied international relations. You need a mix of people that have different competences. And when you put those together, you can be much stronger. And I have learned when I started in foreign ministry a lot about law, about international relations. And I hope I've been able to contribute a bit the way of thinking that I had learned being in STEM. You learn to think in a very rational way. You maybe take a step away from emotions, see what is necessary, and then take it back into your field. And that has worked for me. I've been it's just a generalist diplomat being all over the place, development cooperation, Middle East, UN, trade relation policy in Romania, in Bucharest. And then by sheer coincidence, I ended up in our mission in Vienna as the deputy. And that was actually my first encounter with nuclear issues. And I found them very fascinating. And the geophysics bit then had to come back when I worked with CTBT matters, which was great. It's the first time since I started working. And it's a steep learning curve when you start on nuclear issues. But I think we've all had to go through that at some point or another. So when I meet young colleagues that start in these areas, or when I try to hire people, many people will say, oh, but it's hard, it's technical, it's complicated. I say, no, it's not. Yes, it is, but we can all learn that. You know, you ask experts to explain it to you to the level that you need to know, because you don't need to become the expert on everything. But you need to be able to translate technical expertise into policy. And I find that very fascinating to do. So when I came to Vienna in 2009, I think, there weren't as many women there as there currently are. So I'm very pleased to see that trend. And also my own team has more women than men here in Brussels. but the EU team in Vienna is more women than men, in Geneva, in New York. So we're doing pretty good, I think, in our balance. And as for skills, I think I'm convinced that the most important part is that you need to be interested. Interested in what you're dealing with, and you need to have the willingness to go in depth and that things be explained to you. If you come from a policy side, you shouldn't be afraid of technical issues. And if you come from a technical side, you shouldn't be afraid of policy issues, and you should try to understand what it is that diplomats do and need from you, and how you can interact with them and talk to them. Because in this field there are a lot of different roles. Some get to be HRVP and run Iran deals. I sit on a quite lower level, but still very much on diplomatic level. But I work very closely with people that are nuclear physicists or otherwise have technical expertise, with policy officers at another level. So in this area, there is room for a lot of capabilities and skills. So what I would advise everybody is to think, what is your role? What do you want to contribute? And if that's what you want, if that's what you're interested in, then that's what you can do. If you need to ask for help of others, and if that's women mentoring, that's great, but it could be anyway. And just perceive what you think your role is in this. So that's what I think have to offer for this.
Can I say words? Because
sure,
I think
absolutely.
if I can, because I think that Marjolijn pointed out something very important. There is no more important role or less important role. You're part of a team, and a team doesn't work if you don't have all the roles filled in by people that love what they're doing. Exactly, this is the engine. This is what I've seen. You can be, the best president of the United States. If you don't have a good team behind you, no way you can do anything in life, anything, even with the most powerful position in the world. So don't perceive roles as more important or less important, because you can have a key role in a certain moment, and whatever the grade is. And I think passion in what you're doing is the only thing that really counts, indeed. Sorry if I jumped in again.
No, that's great. I fully agree. That's why many of us are working in this field. Through the passion. And one of them is Sibylle, who we often rely on when we run our courses, both for the students from STEM programs or for diplomats in Vienna. And Marjolijn, you're absolutely right. When many of them come to serve in Vienna, and now they're not only dealing with the multilateral issues and organizations like the IAEA and CTBT, but also need to cover the nuclear portfolio. So, Sibylle, we go to you and others in our network for being experts in providing instruction in some of their courses. So, to you, Sibylle. Did she freeze? Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. I was kicked out of the meeting just as I was about to speak. So, so thanks very much, Elena. And I couldn't agree more with what was just said by my two colleagues about the need to be interested in what you do. And that actually brings me back to my studies of when I decided to do my bachelor's thesis, my master's thesis, and my PhD on arms-related issues. And I got some very curious questions about why I was interested in this as a woman and how I thought I would ever make a career in this. And I thought, I don't know, I just find it interesting. So that was always my answer. It was really the interest that was driving this. So things I think overall have changed, but they're changing very slowly. And what I also think is very interesting is that while I see this through the lens of my personal experience, it would be really interesting to have more data on this and more statistics. So I know that there are still manuals because I still see them. And I know that there are still panels with only one female speaker and events with only one female speakers, because that still happens to me regularly, even though it seems to happen less. But I haven't counted. And it would also be very interesting to know how these figures play out in different issue areas and the different communities in the different countries. So for example, from my experience, bio events seem to be more gender balanced than missile events. And I'm very sorry to say that my own country of origin, Germany, I think still has a very long way to go in making the field of non-proliferation disarmament research more gender balanced. So let's try to get some data on this also to move it forward. And I think transparency in who's doing well and who's not doing well may also help us in advance this agenda. But also when I look at the bright side, it's great to be on a panel with 3 other women in senior positions. So that really illustrates that there is progress. I'm also the first female chair of the consortium. And 3 years ago, the consortium board finally became gender balanced. It had actually been all male until then. So there is progress. And you also asked about bringing in more women and young people. And I think what really needs to happen for this is to create spaces, comfortable spaces to grow, to express yourself and to speak, and also space at the negotiating table, space to set priorities, to make decisions on strategies and budgets and so on and so forth. And while it's really important that women and young people claim these spaces, it's also up to those who are established in the field to create such spaces, because otherwise one has to waste a lot of energy to get a foot in the door, use the elbows, or to end up on the sofa instead of in a chair, as you already hinted. And what also is really important, I think, is to help others, not just to get a foot in the door, but then to help them stay in the field and climb up. So let's keep working on that. And on your question on skills and qualities, I was thinking about that, and I've come up with 7 skills and qualities, which I think will get all of you very far and will get all of us very far, because I think we need them collectively to make progress on non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control. So the first one is clear thinking and solid analysis. Second one is excellence, and that's non-negotiable. Third one is commitment. Then being authentic. Don't try to be someone else, and that is something that was also, I think, raised earlier. You can be the best you there is, and that's a unique role that you have. Integrity is also really essential. Empathy is something that was already mentioned by Federica, so really listening and really caring will change a lot. And the last one is creative problem solving. So here's my list, and back to you, Elena.
Thank you, Sibylle. Very good list. I think we all can associate, subscribe to it, at least me. You want to add something, Marjolijn?
Can I add not to be afraid of the list?
Not to be afraid of the list. I agree with that as well. But I know our audience is probably dying to ask their questions. We could discuss that even further, but there are questions that are coming in that are both focused on the policy issues and some of the discussion about the next generation and engagement. Many of the questions are focused on the role of the European Union in the NPT and the NPT review process. That's one of the questions, and maybe I'll ask both Federica and Marjolijn to speak about that. I know, Federica, you've already mentioned the change you made at the 2015 review conference with your personnel, but this is one of the areas where many of the questions are focused on. The other area that I also thought that, Federica, maybe now that you're out of your official position, governmental or intergovernmental position, speak a little bit more about the role of Europe and how, given all these different countries, we have countries with nuclear weapons, countries that support nuclear disarmament very actively, including the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, is what role the EU Commission or EU Parliament could have, or EU different institutions of it, including in the light of the upcoming first meeting of the state parties of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that will take place in Vienna in January of next year. Sibylle, you're welcome to join that discussion as well, but like with two specific area focus with the NPT and the role of Europe, focus on disarmament, but specifically on the TPNW. What I'll do is maybe start with you, Federica, and then we'll see if others want to chime in.
Yes, I'll be short on this point because I think Marjolijn might have more updated insights. It's true now I'm free, but also what I can share more is my experience of my 5 years in office, +1 in the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's now 1.5 years that I am, as you say, free. And so there might be insights that Marjolijn can share with you in a much more competent manner. What I can say is this, that in my experience, indeed, and if you allow me, I mix the two topics. There are issues on arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament on which member states have diverging views. It's no mystery, and it's very self-evident. In my experience, in this case, it's obviously the key point is to try and come to some sort of common position to be expressed anyway, which is a powerful exercise in itself, but also allows many others to align to your statements normally, which is also a very important thing in this kind of dynamics, because it gives the European Union the role of somehow an umbrella under which other like-minded countries can recognize themselves. And I think this is always healthy and good when this happens. You somehow try to guide the discussion or to gather the international consensus as much as you can. But again, this is an argument you can use to try and incentivize member states to find a common position, but not always this is possible. And on both on the role of the European Union on the NPT, but also on issues on which you might be facing divisions among member states, I think that there is a specific role for the External Action Service in first of all, highlighting and being vocal about what we agree upon, which is not little things. And there is a lot to be highlighted. This is always considered as a niche segment of work for European policies, wrongly so, I believe, because if you think of it, so much of our security depends on that, and we give it for granted sometimes. And so what is possible to be done in any case, and no other institutions, I think, would do it in an institutional manner, is to highlight what is already the common ground, what are already the initiatives that the European Union is supporting, what are already the policies and the organizations that the European Union is contributing to in the field of arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation. And also, in some cases, but this is tricky, the High Representative himself or herself, or the Special Envoy can try to be more vocal than the sum of the member states' positions would allow. It's a risk you can take. I think you have to always measure the risk and avoid the backfiring possibility, because then you do more damage than good. But sometimes you can try and say things that stay on paper, that create policy somehow, push a little bit further the limits of what is intended to be the common position. It's a risky exercise. You have to make sure that you would not have negative reactions the following day. In my view, the role of the High Representative in particular, because you can also play, now this is something I can say now because I'm free, but you can play the freedom of representing two different institutions. You can, if the Commission reacts badly, you can say, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Council. And if the Council reacts badly, you can say, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Commission, and you're free. You're in a no man's land that allows you some flexibility. But sometimes I think it is the role of the External Action Service, the High Representative, Special Envoys, to not only to be the spokesperson of the consolidated position of the 27, but also to try and put forward a vision. Again, you need to be wise enough to know what is the limit of what you do. What is the sustainability, not the limit, sustainability. And in terms of what the other institutions can do, the Parliament is often active, very active on these issues. In some cases with very competent and solid work. But I have to say, having been a politician myself and having been a member of Parliament myself, so I take the responsibility on me as well. In some cases, parliamentary discussions and actions on issues related to arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament could become or tend to become extremely ideological in nature. And I think this is counterproductive to the quality of the discussion that can be done, because it's indeed, I think that this is a kind of work that has no political tolerance for the security of Europe and the world. So I've seen that sometimes it becomes ideological, and I think it is not serving the purpose of making it a priority for the entire union, the entire institution, the entire political spectrum. So in some cases, there's very solid work, but by definition, the work that the Parliament does is a party political approach. And I think that politicizing the work on non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control might sometimes do damage. And I say this having been someone that has been party political all my life, so no negative connotation to that, but there are some areas on which the search for bipartisan approaches has double value, and I think this is one of those fields.
Thank you, Federica. I'm sure Marjolijn is taking note of some of your advances as well as many others. Marjolijn, would you like to talk maybe a little bit more about the NPT and disarmament within that context? I know that in addition to your role as the head of the EEAS, you also are representing the Dutch government in the NPT review conference, and you are vice president of the upcoming NPT review conference, and also chair of the main committee 3 on peaceful uses. So I don't know how you will be able to keep your different hats even today when you're answering some of these questions, but pick one of these hats or share them how you like it.
Okay, thanks, Elena. No, today I squarely have my EU hat on, and it's not going anywhere. So I'll speak here, in my EU capacity. But I think I agree very much with Federica, what she says about the importance of the EU speaking with one voice. And it was actually in 1995, just before the review, the extension conference of the NPT, that the EU had its first common position on the NPT, and it has had one ever since. And we're working very hard to get one this time as well, because indeed it's not easy to come to one given the diversity within the group. But this group does have a willingness to come to an agreement. So what we come up with after our quite fierce internal debates is something that many others can then sign up to, and that can have a multiplier effect. So we're working still very much on that. Of course, now that the review conference has been postponed several times, we will only finalize that process 1 or 2 months before the review conference, and when we know it's actually going to happen, to take place, so that we still have some time for that. And to make sure that position is then heard loud and clear. And it's not like, okay, then we have that and we ask the HRVP to read it out, or I read something out and then that's it. No, we need to engage with other countries to explain our positions, to see what they can support. You really need to make sure that it is socialized and that voice is well heard, and that's a lot of work. But that's one aspect. Let's say the how we deal with the review conference, with the bigger political picture. But also what I tried to explain before is that there's also a lot of actual very practical work involved that is needed to bring the implementation of the NPT forward. And there we are doing a lot on different fronts. And that's also where other EU institutions come in quite a bit, which we try to bring together in order to jointly promote this implementation. So if the questions are about disarmament, we've done a lot of work on supporting the CTBT and an outreach on the CTBT. It's been one of the highest priorities for the EU. We have kept pushing for the negotiations of an FMCT, and we even had capacity building to developing countries to be able to participate. And it's not for lack of our trying that these negotiations aren't taking place yet. And we're still very much promoting a fissile material, lost the word here, moratorium to be implemented before we have this FMCT. We are contributing quite a lot to disarmament verification. As I said, in IPNDV, there's a big technological track, but there's also a political track in IPNDV. And we are now also working on risk reduction and see as an EU what we would think about what needs to be done in risk reduction. And that's also quite a tough discussion. Now, the big elephant in the room here is, of course, the TPNW. It is no secret that EU member states have quite contrasting views about this. So we're not going to have an EU position as such on that. It's not something that you paper over with nice words. It's too fundamental for that. So we've agreed to disagree on this issue, and we try to focus on those areas where we can make a difference and have an impact. So that's the work that we're doing. We'll keep doing that. If we find new areas of work and new ideas, we will immediately do them. So, you know, I always have difficulties with the questions, what can you do more? Well, if I knew that, I'd already be doing it, you know. So it's a question that goes on and on in the future. But we keep our radars on things we can do. We keep thinking, and we also keep listening to others in what we can do more. On the European Parliament, they made a very good recommendation a couple of months ago on the NPT for the review conference specifically. Which included support for all those instruments that are under the NPT and to help promote the step-by-step approach. So that was a helpful one.
That's on the Stockholm initiative, right? Or as just
no, I meant the European Parliament.
The European Parliament.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sibylle. Would you like to add something to these topics? Because I have a couple of additional questions. Okay, go ahead.
I'll do that, and I'll be very brief, but because a lot has been said already, I think the EU actually has a very interesting role and special responsibility because it combines so many diverging views. So if the EU can actually move forward and make constructive suggestions, I think that gives a lot of hope and incentives to others that they should also try to make it work. Two areas where I think there's a lot of scope to do things. One is emerging technologies. It's starting to be more and more discussed, and it's an area where everybody's really trying to come to grips with it and understand the impact on risk and on strategic stability, so on and so forth. So it's also a way to engage in a constructive way because everybody's looking for answers. And the second idea I'd like to throw out is about engagement with academic and research communities in those other countries. And I know that the consortium and the network has been quite inward looking over the last decade. Maybe we can work together with the EU to engage more with communities in other countries. Because I'm sometimes worried when I see how relations are aggravating with certain big players. It would be great to keep the dialogue going with a very strong research and scientific academic university communities in those countries. So if you could move that forward, that could also play a really important role, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibylle. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because actually there were some questions that were posed to the panelists that ask about how other countries, or how next generation from other countries could be engaged in the EU consortium work, or in the broader in some of the initiatives that we discussed today. And first I want to maybe say, at least with respect to our initiative, we are not limiting it to just Europeans. So please keep following it on our website, at the VCDNP and at the IAI website. And we also will be providing some of the resources related to some internships and other opportunities. So, but I fully agree with you that we need to do more with the engagement with the other countries. But speaking about the engagement with the other countries, there were a couple of questions that I'm sorry we won't be able to tackle all of them. Asking maybe you, Federica, to think about what the EU could do, and Marjolijn as well, in terms of solving the North Korean issues. Is there a role for the EU in that process? First. The second is the Middle East. Given such a big role that the EU played in the Iran's deal negotiation and facilitating that process, is there a bigger role for the European Union in general in the Middle East, solving many of the problems there, including in helping with the establishment of the zone free of weapons of mass destruction? Back to you, Federica.
Yes, I think that on both issues there is quite an important role to play for the European Union. I think that's on the support to the creation of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. There is a potential for the European Union, for Europe at least, to support it. I have to say, to me personally, the importance of achieving the nuclear deal with Iran was also to avoid a nuclear arms race in the region that is already quite a turbulent one. It has always been conceived as a first step towards the creation of some sort of Helsinki-style security architecture, at least for the Gulf, if not for the wider Middle East. And I think it is realistic to get there if the JCPOA is re-established in full one day. It will take a lot of work, but you see that things are moving. You might see that Saudi Arabia is lightly opening up the talks. I think there is an interest, as there was an interest in Europe, to create a security architecture. It's exactly when you don't like your neighbors that you need it. If you're friends, it becomes almost irrelevant. But it's exactly when you have tensions and problems that you need the security architecture to be put in place, and preventive measures and arms control measures, including on missiles. Iran, I think Iran is ready to discuss the ballistic missiles, provided it is included in a more general arms control discussion with all the neighbors, which obviously is not self-evident, but not impossible also. On Korean Peninsula, I think I've always thought that the European Union has a bigger role to play than the one that we have played so far. There are contacts of the European Union itself, of member states with North Korea. I've personally also had a bilateral meeting with the North Korean foreign minister at a certain moment, keeping obviously Seoul always informed and briefed. I visited Seoul myself several times and actually down to the demarcation line also. I think that there, the added value of the European Union is exactly the fact that it's in the position of talking to everybody without major problems. Obviously, staying very clear on human rights issues when talking with North Korea. But the European Union has the capacity in many different parts of the world to keep the channels of human rights dialogues separately from other kind of negotiations, and do one without damaging the other. And moreover, the Europeans in general, I think, have the experience of divided continents and heavy history, and have an understanding, I think, of the dynamics that could be even technically relevant for moving forward, both on the nuclear issue, but also in general terms on the political issue. So, moreover, and this is something we discussed actually, including with the US administration during the Trump presidency, I think that obviously you need the United States to be the main negotiator, because for Pyongyang, it's the United States, the interlocutor, is not Seoul, because for them, South Korea is invaded by the United States, so they have to talk with the United States, not to Seoul. That is the starting point. So obviously, you need the United States to be engaged and committed and at the table. But we've always warned them, and also this is, I think, my understanding. This is also the understanding of South Korea. If you leave such a negotiation in a bilateral setup only, you expose it too much to the ups and downs of even personal twists of the mood, which are not unlikely at least on one side, sometimes also on the second side. And the experience of Iran shows us that what you need to have for a successful, long and complicated negotiation, and Korea is completely different from Iran, but the two elements, the nuclear commitments on one side in exchange of economic sanctions relief and economic benefits. So the two elements, the two key pillars of the negotiation are the same, even if the context is completely different. The Iran experience tells us that it works if you have the big players around the table, those that you cannot miss. And here you have to have them really engaged. But then if you also have a broader framework that dilutes the tensions that will arise at any time and every time in such a negotiation that can be long and difficult, with an external facilitator that has a more distanced position from the topics you're discussing, and can play the part of, indeed, the connection with the larger UN framework, for instance, because any kind of agreement of that kind at a certain moment will have to end up in the Security Council. And also that has the capacity to, as I said, dilute or direct the flow of the tensions and maybe pause or intensify talks without being a direct party to the negotiations. I think this is essential to conduct something as complicated and heavy as a negotiation on the Korean issue. But I think it is not impossible, and I think Europeans can contribute largely to that, including because Europe has incentives for North Korea that are not irrelevant at all in terms of humanitarian aid or development, trade, and the channel open with China, which is at the end of the day one of the biggest stakeholders there. But it was longer than.
No, thank you. That's very good and interesting, and I just only wish that we had more time, because the questions are good and we're all getting really good discussion here. Marjolijn and Sibylle, would you have something to add? Or just say a few words, because we're already a little bit over time. We'll have to finish soon. So maybe 1 minute or so.
Okay, then very briefly, indeed, the EU supports the establishment of a weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East. In political terms, we were also supporting UNIDIR in a very interesting project in making a timeline of all the efforts and very important moments that have taken place up to now, and to see what lessons we can draw from that and lessons that we can draw from other initiatives such as the JCPOA. And it also helps bring people from the region and others together in a track 1.5 situation. So with that, we hope to play a helpful role. And on the DPRK, well, given the important threats to international security, we don't really have an option than to be involved. For now, the immediate priority is on getting the DPRK to refrain from further provocations and not undermine the environment for dialogue. So we are ready as EU to support new initiatives, but to get to that point and to get to the table, our focus is on full implementation of sanctions. Because their goal, their objective is to demonstrate the cost of not moving towards dialogue. So that is where we are at the moment, but we're ready to support any process, including in bringing our experience from other peace processes in terms of building multilateral support frameworks, monitoring and verification agreements, dispute settlement, and other elements in facilitating of a complex negotiating process, because in such a thing you need a lot of different angles, and I think that's something that's come up now several times, the different angles that we all need, and that's why we all need to contribute from our own perspective to solve these important issues of international security. I'll stop.
Thank you. Sibylle, I'll give you the floor to kind of conclude our panel here, either on these issues or anything that you would like to say in the conclusion, because unfortunately we're running a little bit over. In 1 minute, here you go.
Thanks, Elena. Very brief concluding remarks. I would be thrilled if the EU could play a more active role in the DPRK situation. I think the EU has an enormous amount to contribute, and it would be great if it was possible to move that ahead. On the Middle East, I'll actually link to what I just said earlier, and enabling young people to participate. There are amazing young people and young women and academics in the Middle East that we could engage and should engage with. So I think if we could explore opportunities in the context of the network, the consortium, and more broadly to engage them, they are just voices that should be heard and need to be heard and be involved. So if we can move forward on that, I think we could really also achieve a lot. And I would really like to thank all of you for engagement. And I think it should not be underestimated that the EU has been supporting these educational efforts, next generation efforts, involvement of women. And I think if we all join forces, there's a lot that we can change going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibylle, and thank you all, Federica and Marjolijn, for making yourself available today, for sharing us some of your experiences working in the field, your careers, but also speaking about today's challenges in non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament. As I mentioned, there were many questions, and I apologize to everyone who has joined us today that we were not able to address them all. It's always a problem when you have wonderful speakers and too little time to go through all the questions. But I also would like to thank our partner, the International Affairs Institute, for working with us to organize this event and many other activities, and obviously thank the EU Consortium and the European Council for the support of the work of the center and the network and the consortium itself. With that, I would really want to say that there were many comments and questions coming about the availability of this event today for others to maybe look to review later. And something I want to say that event was recorded and will be posted. Just follow our website, our or IAI, you will see that. But I also promise that we will be posting any opportunities in any other our own or within the European Union EU consortium or other that we come across that may help the next generation and particularly young women to get more knowledge, to expand their interest in the field, to see how we can engage across regions and globally. This is something that's really close to my heart and to the work of our partners. And thank you also all of our speakers today for today's event and for your continuing support in many of the endeavors. And thanks to our audience. And with that, everybody have a very nice rest of your day and stay safe and healthy. Thank you. Bye-bye.